So let's begin with three related questions. Question number one is, what is the most important issue in the world today? Some people might say it's climate change. Some might say it's the economy, maybe war, human rights. What's the most important issue facing the world today? Question two, if you're in school right now, what are you taught to be the most important issue? And question three, for parents, what's your greatest concern for your children right now? So I would like to propose today that the most important issue in the world is how much we love God. So let's go to the gospel and see what it says. It says, one of the scribes came near and heard the religious authorities disputing with one another. And seeing that Jesus answered them well, he asked him, which commandment is the first of all? Now in the Old Testament, there are 613 precepts. Now with that many, it's not obvious, well, which would be the most important among the 613. Now also notice when we hear his answer, he doesn't even go to the 10 Commandments to get his answer. Okay, Jesus answered, the first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. So Jesus here is quoting a Jewish prayer called the Shema, means to hear. So notice in his answer, he's not saying that the greatest commandment is a rule or a cause. It's not even a precept. The greatest commandment is a prayer. And so this prayer had to be said multiple times a day by pious Jews. And when it says to love God with all of the heart, soul, mind, and strength, it means to love God with all that we have and are. So Jesus tells us the most important commandment is to love God. But I think our whole society basically tells us that God is second. So think about how many people say climate change is the most important issue facing humanity right now. A lot of politicians might say it's the economy. The media might say it's anti-racism. And then when we go to school, it's obvious that there's so many more important things to learn than God, right? That's the way the courses work. So I think our whole society keeps on telling us that God is second. Now, let's be clear. I'm not saying that caring for the environment and the economy, I'm not saying they're not important. They are important. All I'm saying is that the human person is more important, and then more important than that is God. Now, the scribe asks Jesus, what's the first commandment? And notice that Jesus, right away, without being asked, gives him a second. So he says, the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. So Jesus draws a connection, love of God, love of neighbor, they commandment, and you can't separate them. And so the Christian intuition is that if we love God, we'll love each other more. But if we don't love God, eventually we won't love other people as well as we should. Now, some of you have heard that famous ethics question that's asked in college class. So if your dog, if your pet or a stranger are drowning, who do you save first? Now, in St. Anthony's, we'll ask the question, if Deacon Andrew or Father Justin are drowning, who are we going to save first? Deacon Andrew, I knew it. Okay, so what I'm saying is that as people believe less and less in God, more and more college students are answering they'll save their pet over a stranger. Now, for a Christian, we couldn't ever do that, right? We have to save a stranger over our favorite dog or cat because every person is made in the image of God. The notion of human rights comes from Judeo-Christian culture. Now, throughout history, there have been lots of people who have said, treat other people well, absolutely, but they never had a concept of what's called a human right. Human right means you are owed something simply because of who you are. This was especially developed in the 16th century, actually by a Catholic priest. So human rights cannot be given by other people, and they're not given by the government, because if human rights are given by the government could take them away. Human rights are given by God, and that means no one can take them away. So here's a historical example. Atheistic communism and socialism have been responsible for 94 million deaths in the world. Here's another example, overpopulation. Overpopulation has been a concern for many decades. Now, the church doesn't have any official position on this. The church has just given moral principles. One moral principle is, if there is a population crisis, you can't use abortion and sterilization to fix it. Another principle would be, if there is a population crisis, you cannot see the human person as a problem. Because sometimes there are people who say, people are parasites on the earth. They'll say, people are cancer. You can't say that because the person is made in the image of God. China, as many of us know, for many decades had the one-child policy, and that did great harm to the human person for a long time. But now, they've reversed that policy because it's not that they have too many people. China doesn't have enough young people. Another example, Europe. Europe used to be a Christian culture, and they'd focus more on God first. But as Europe has become more and more secular, they focus less on God, more on people. But funny enough, as they focus more on people, a lot of people say, well, it's the humans that are the problem. We need less humans. And in 2020, the United Nations reported that 2/3 of European countries are now trying to increase their fertility rates. I want to share with you a 5-minute video on overpopulation. It's not a perfect video. It doesn't answer every question. Its main contribution is that it's a pro-human attitude. The main point of this video is that if we respect the human person, other things will fall into place. And that's similar to the Christian intuition. The Christian intuition is, if we love God first, we'll be able to love other people, and then things will fall into place. So this is the video.
There are now 8 billion people living on the planet. Is there enough room for all of us? Aren't we going to run out of natural resources? How are we going to feed everybody? These are not new questions. Doomsayers have been asking them for at least 200 years. In 1798, an English economist named Thomas Malthus wrote his famous essay on the principle of population. In it, Malthus claimed that population grew exponentially, while resources needed to feed that population grew at a linear rate. The difference between the two growth rates, he argued, must lead to starvation. Malthus was wrong, and not by a little, by a lot. As the population grew, food production improved, and so did almost everything else. Consider the life of a typical American blue-collar worker over the span of a century. Using a unit of measurement known as time prices, we can estimate the amount of time someone would have to work to buy a given item. Between 1900 and 2018, the length of time our blue-collar worker had to work to earn enough money to buy a pound of pork fell by 98%, to buy a pound of rice by 97%, to buy a pound of coffee, 94%. While people can't eat rubber, aluminum, or cotton, these commodities are valuable inputs in the production processes that impact the prices of goods and services, and hence the overall standard of living. Their prices fell by 99%, 98%, and 96% respectively, while population of the United States rose from 76 million to 328 million. Famines, which were once common, have disappeared outside of war zones. In much of the world today, it's obesity, not starvation, that is a problem. This relationship between population growth and abundance may seem counterintuitive, but it's true. Remember this chart that so frightened Malthus? The reality looks very different. The more people we have, the more abundance we have. Relative to previous generations, we now live in a world of superabundance, the term that my colleague and co-author Gail Pooley and I have coined and use as the title of our book. What makes this superabundance possible? The answer is knowledge. Thomas Sowell, the brilliant Hoover Institution economist, explains it this way. The difference in the standard of living between the caveman and us is not natural resources. The difference is knowledge. We have a lot more of it, and we use that knowledge to make things from the same natural resources that existed during the time of the caveman, but which the caveman could never have imagined. Let's look at something as simple as a grain of sand. It's been lying around for billions of years. Then, some 4,500 years ago, someone figured out that by heating sand to just over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, sand could be turned into glass beads, then glass jars, and much later, window panes. With every step of discovery, the value produced from a grain of sand increased. Today we use glass in fiber optic cables and computer microchips, turbocharging our productivity, thus making us much more prosperous than our ancestors. Counting the quantity of known raw materials, like Malthus and many other people have done, might seem logical, but it misses the ingredient that changes everything: knowledge. And new knowledge emerges from the human mind. A newborn comes into the world not only with an empty stomach, but also a brain capable of intelligent, potentially world-changing thought. So what really matters is not the finite number of atoms on the planet, be they of zinc or copper or any other element, but the human ability to combine and recombine those atoms in ever more valuable ways. Therefore, we can confidently say that economic growth is less about resources, which are limited, and more about knowledge, which is limitless. As the Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Romer put it, new ideas do not add up, they multiply. Here is another useful analogy. The world is a closed system in the way that a piano is a closed system. The instrument has only 88 keys, but those keys can be played in an infinite number of ways. The same applies to our planet. The Earth's atoms may be fixed, but the possible combinations of those atoms are infinite. What matters, then, is not the physical limits of our planet, but the human beings and their freedom to experiment and reimagine the use of resources that we have. Can we continue to live in a superabundant world? That depends on two components: people and freedom. The more people the planet has, and the more freedom they enjoy, the greater the likelihood that new, useful ideas will be generated to tackle our problems, whatever they happen to be. So, do you still think there are too many people? Or maybe not enough. I'm Marianne Tupy, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute and co-author of Superabundance.
So the Catholic Church loves the world, loves people, but the Catholic Church is always reminding us beautifully, God comes first. God comes first, first, first. So when we look at the Ten Commandments, we see that the first three have to do with loving God. The last seven have to do with loving other people. When we pray the Our Father every day, again, the first three petitions have to do with praising God. The last four with loving our neighbor. When it comes to funerals, have you noticed that we Catholics, we don't ever use the term celebration of life? Why don't we do celebrations of life? Of course, we love the person who died, but the focus is on God, who created this beautiful person. For us, that's the focus of a Catholic funeral, and on Jesus, who died and rose to give that beautiful person eternal life. When it comes to weddings, the focus of our weddings is not on the couple. That's second. The focus of the wedding is on Jesus. And if a couple has Jesus in their marriage, they should have a better marriage because they'll have to love each other more. And finally, the Church says for us Catholics, it's a moral obligation to go to Mass every Sunday. And here in Canada, December 25th and January 1st, just giving a reminder, it's coming up. And the Church says that, God asks that, because God deserves the first day of our week. Today in your pews, we've put out our Christ the King challenge cards. So we're going to answer these cards in 3 weeks on Christ the King Sunday. And we just ask three questions. One, have you chosen to make Jesus the center of your life? And if not, would you like him to be? And the third question is, if you've made that decision for the first time, have you made it in the past 12 months? So we're just giving you these just so that we have clarity what's coming up. As I've said before, it's so beautiful that Jesus has made us the center of his life. And when we look at the crucifix, we see that Jesus died because he put God the Father first, and he made us second. And the two of them go together. You can never separate them. So Jesus' teaching today implies that the most important issue facing our world today is how much we love God, and that he comes first.